Now, what will you be doing a year tomorrow? In an unpredictable world, we can reasonably be confident that large numbers of us will be watching the same thing. The opening ceremony of the 2012 London Olympics will usher in the world's greatest festival of sport. The thing is on time and under budget, or under the budget has trebled after the bid went in, and will cost us all the thick end of £9 billion. The massive expense was justified by the last government for the way it would regenerate great areas of East London. As Peter Marshall reports, there's many a slip.
This is how the dream took shape. Space-age arenas for the world to visit, built in 3 years on wasteland and what were polluted industrial sites. And the centrepiece, the 80,000-seat Olympic Stadium. Amazing what a few billion can do. Already they're laying the running track for the 100 metres. But then the most ambitious pledges are still to be kept. London got the Olympics not just because they could put on a big show on time, but because of what they promised would come next. The regeneration of London's poorest areas. This is to be the launch pad. The future is supposed to start here. And behind the £9 billion plus of public money, there is, of course, a buzzword. The buzzword is legacy.
One of the boxes.
Yes.
Legacy seems to mean different things to different people, a point gleefully seized by the current BBC satire.
The Olympics isn't really about sport at all. This whole thing starts when the sport ends.
Right, and presumably sustainability is actually very closely connected to legacy.
Beg your pardon?
Well,
it is not. They are not the same. They are not.
The original London bid promised legacy would mean the regeneration of an entire community for the benefit of everyone who lives there. Most of the Olympics will happen in the East London borough of Newham. The locals have already faced years of disruption with the building work, and there's no let-up. The mayor says it'll only be worth it if they can see the benefits.
This is an area of poverty that's been an area of poverty for over a century. We want to change that.
But you're worried at the moment that people could end up resenting things?
Yes. We're going to have an opening ceremony dress rehearsal. We want our residents at that. OK, we don't get to the opening ceremony. That's OK. We get the dress rehearsal. We'll get the feel of an Olympics being in the park. There's lots of things you can do to get a feel and be part of the Olympics.
And you think local residents should be invited for that?
Well, of course they should.
In the longer term, East London needs jobs. The Mayor, Sir Robin Wales, says construction of the £1.5 billion new shopping centre, privately funded, has offered far better prospects than the Olympic project. But the man who's so far delivering the Olympics on time and under budget says that's unfair.
I could not have built this relying on Robin turning up with people to provide the labour force to the contractors. You always want to get the thing built on time. You always want to create jobs. We gave more focus here than in my experience we've ever done to actually creating training opportunities for people. In the end, we made it a condition of the contract with the contractors that they had to employ a certain percentage of trainees as part of their workforce.
These youngsters training in South London are part of a charitable project run in the most deprived boroughs to encourage participation in sport. It's got no Olympics funding, but its director is unconvinced by promises of the game's sporting legacy. In the original bid, Lord Coe pledged the London Games would inspire a new generation of youth to greater sporting activity. Some believe no one at the Olympics is delivering on that promise.
I'm not quite sure who's taking responsibility. At the moment, I'm not quite sure who it is. There are various people, you could say. Sebastian Coe was obviously the person in Singapore who made the comment. Since then, it's been unclear whose responsibility it is to create the participation aspect of the legacy.
But if you don't know who to ask, then what hope is there?
I think there are many sports where participation is decreasing. Overall, we're hoping that the legacy obviously is something that will happen after the Olympics, but in order to have success we need to plan now.
Nice and high, side step.
Michael de Giorgio's Greenhouse project's been lauded for encouraging sport, not just for the sporty, but for everyone. He says coaches have to be well qualified and based in deprived areas long term.
There are many programs where people go in and say there are 50,000 people doing this now and they weren't before. Yes, but you're not going to make any difference to their lives by going in for a short term.
Because they'll stop doing it in a few weeks' time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so far so good.
Good.
Perhaps the biggest headache of the Games will be transporting millions of visitors. The satirists of 2012 have already made hay.
It's like flying an aeroplane. You get this right, no one's going to notice. You get it wrong,
everyone notices.
Yeah, well, first they notice, yeah, and then they die.
Right, so how do we make sure that, they don't die?
Stratford, home of the Olympic Park, is a growing public transport hub with 14 rail lines in and out. But the sheer volume of passengers for the Games will be a challenge. And the roads, already notorious for snarl-ups, are a real concern. At the Railway Tavern, just opposite the Olympic Village, business is booming. Tourists have been arriving all year to see the site of next year's Games. But the landlady is worried. Next year, the road outside will be closed 18 hours a day for 3 months. Even the beer lorries won't get through.
I've already had the road shut for 18 months when they were dismantling a bridge and building a new bridge.
How did you cope then?
We managed, but it was... We was part of a building site. I know we were going to have disruption because we're so close to the proximity of the actual site. I understand that. But and people do speak to you, but they just seem to think that, well, it's the Olympics and that's it. You've got to swallow.
As you can see, we're right at what will be the...
But the head of the Olympic Legacy Company, the man in charge of the future, says it'll pay off. He knows the real regeneration of East London will take another 20 years and private investors with further billions to spend. And there are no guarantees.
If the idea which is being floated around the country at the moment is for greater regionalisation, stuff moving away from London to the regions, maybe London won't need to grow anymore.
Well, London's always growing. London's projected to grow between 7 to 8 million people. It's a global city. It needs to accommodate that growth. You're seeing it around you. I mean, look at all of the buildings that are here in the backdrop. That's all testament to the fact that London's growing, and this will be a new centre for London.
Predicting whether 2012 has a successful legacy is an exercise in speculation, because legacy is something which by definition can only really be judged with hindsight. So we'll have to wait until after next year, in fact until years after 2012, before we can really see whether the £9 billion plus gamble is paying off.